Hello, once again. I am here today to continue on our discussion on indigenous, hence the indigenous voices, brought to you by Save the Deaf and Endangered Languages Initiative. Last week, I began a topic that says promoting early language access in indigenous deaf communities. And today, I want to continue on that topic. Last week, we discussed who should promote early language access and why should we promote early language access. And today we are going to see how can we promote early language access, and we're going to look at a variety of things, and we'll see how far we're going to go on the topic. But before I continue, I want to say Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. Last Sunday was the Father's Day globally, and it was observed. And I want to wish you Happy Father's Day in an indigenous Nigerian sign language, as it is signed Happy Father's Day. Watch my hand shape. All right. So this is how it is signed in an indigenous sign language. If you know how it is signed in your indigenous sign language, you can sign and send us a video, and possibly we would show it on our program, and many other expressions that we're going to be seeing. I wish you a very great life ahead of you as you continue to be great fathers in your homes. Let's go ahead and hit it on our today's topic. The second reason we should promote early language access for deaf children is the fact that early language access promotes or supports early literacy. So let me explain literacy now. Literacy is the acquisition of knowledge that happens prior to school. Literacy and education continue when a child is enrolled in school and begins to learn. But prior to that, the ability to read and write, or the ability to acquire knowledge from the environment, from print literacy to every other literacy material that is represented in the environment of the child, begins at home. It begins in the environment of the child. So the child uses both the head, the ears, and the eyes, and the articulators in the mouth to process language, to express himself, and also to comprehend what others are saying. But when early language access does not happen, it can affect the ability to learn, whether in school or out of school, for that child. So sometimes we have heard about some deaf children that are not doing well in school. Of course, in many schools that we have visited, some teachers complain how low academic capacity that the deaf children have. Part of this could be because many of them didn't have access to early sign language before getting to school, and they are all packing all this together as a process of learning. It can impact any child. It's not just about the deaf children alone. And so this is the second reason we are talking about the importance of promoting early language access for deaf children. Now we go to the who. Who does promote early language access? I said in the beginning, anybody and everybody that works in the deaf community. Are you a deaf adult who understands the importance of early language access? You should be a deaf mentor. You should serve as a deaf mentor. You should identify a deaf child to impact the importance of early language acquisition. You should work with families to be able to help them raise their deaf child to be a signer. In my class, my students shared a whole lot of experiences, which some of them are so pathetic. And one of the students shared how he knows a deaf family. Both parents are deaf, man and woman, but they don't want their children to sign. Their children are hearing, but they don't want to teach their children to sign. Why? Well, the answers could come from left and right, but for us, we know that it is not the right thing. Okay? So for that family, they should introduce their children to their world, to their culture. And these things are common in our communities. Okay, so a deaf adult has a responsibility of seeing himself as a deaf mentor, raising some deaf children and helping families to have access to early sign language. A sign language interpreter is the next person. If you are a sign language interpreter, if you understand the importance of early language access for a deaf child, you should serve as an advocate. You should identify a family to work with. You should identify a deaf child to work with. And you should lead this deaf child to the knowledge of understanding how important sign language means to him or her, because that is a natural language for the deaf people. You should do that. Why? Because your job is not just only to interpret. You are an advocate. To the best of my knowledge, any and every sign language interpreter should serve as an advocate. And that advocacy should be extended to the proper job, the proper work of raising a deaf child in acquiring sign language early. Helping a deaf child to acquire sign language early. This is very crucial. Sign linguists, researchers in deaf communities, your job should include advocacy. This is peculiar to African country. I'm not sure of how it plays out in some other communities, but in many of our African deaf communities, it is important that anybody that is working in these communities should prioritize the importance of raising deaf children because of the scarcity of sign language amongst deaf children in the homes. There is scarcity of sign language amongst deaf children in the home. Sign language is not found in the homes of many deaf children growing up. Even when the child is capable of developing his own home sign with the parents, sometimes you find out that parents, this was so pathetic when the students shared it in a class. A deaf child that the mother would forbid anybody signing to. You can imagine that. Now, the deaf child is capable of developing cognitive skills like a hearing child when introduced to early language access. And the deaf child is also capable of developing his own sign language called home sign, which is more of gestural communication, which can develop over time into sign language. But whereby the deaf child is forbidden from signing, what happens? And we say that this happens when the deaf child is forbidden from signing, when the deaf child is forbidden from signing too, because the parents do not have the knowledge of what is going on and what they're doing. They need someone to help them out. They need someone to direct them, to redirect them for the sake of that child. For every single deaf child that grows up languageless, sign language dies. Cognitive capacity dies. For most parents that we have seen, it becomes late for them when the child begins to go to school at age 8 and 10. It becomes like a regret. They wish they would have known before now to have sent the child to school or to have found a way to allow the child to express himself. But if we prioritize advocacy, all of us that are working in deaf communities, and concentrate advocacy into the deaf families where the deaf child is born today, I think this is going to make a very great impact in the lives of deaf children. So the next thing we should discuss in this topic is the how. How do we promote early language access in the deaf community? How do we do that? We have identified the why. The reason is so important, and we have identified the who. I didn't unintentionally miss out the parents. Of course, the parents are part of the recipients, the receivers of the advocacy, the, if possible, activism. All right, but they are, the very most important aspect of the entire system of promoting early language access. But so looking at the how, it gives us one holistic answer, which is through early intervention program. Early intervention program can mean a lot of things for different sets of people. For children with disability, generally, it is an intervention package that is introduced to the child that is with disability to help the deficiencies, areas that the disability has impacted, developmental areas, developmental aspects of that child's life. It can be any aspect: learning, behavioral, social emotional skills, motor skills, and all that. But for the deaf child, it means just one, which is linguistic. Linguistic now introduces the cognitive and maybe any other thing that could be involved. So let me give a background to early intervention program as it applies to Nigeria and possibly other African countries. Many studies show that if a deaf child is introduced to language in the first 5 years of their life, they will, develop adequate cognitive skill to show no difference between them and their peers that are hearing. And so experts have taken time to design best practices early intervention program, which are family-centered. Such programs are family-centered. That is why I mentioned family as part of the recipients and a very important aspect of the entire package. In countries that practice early intervention program, this program is overseen, this program is implemented by the government, whereby the government trains people or who are experts or who become experts in the implementation of the program through education systems and all other systems that could be involved. But it is disheartening that early intervention program is not practiced, especially for deaf children, particularly right now, is not practiced, is not implemented in some African countries. And the lack of this is a huge negative impact for deaf children and their families. All right, that is the end of our discussion today. We will continue on this topic in the next week. And don't go nowhere. And I want to see you here in the next week as we continue on this topic. We are going to go into the components of best practices early intervention program and the principles that guide them. And this is going to be fascinating. And before then, I just want to say, have a wonderful day and the rest of your week. Bye.